It was a quiet morning at London Heathrow Airport. Passengers moved in waves, pulling suitcases, holding passports, some tired, some excited. Ava, a 19-year-old medical student, stood near gate 22, holding her boarding pass and a thick medical textbook. It was her first international flight alone. Her expression was calm, but inside she felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. As she stepped into the plane and searched for her seat near the window, her eyes briefly caught the figure of a man in a crisp uniform walking out from the cockpit. He looked focused, tall, and quietly confident. That was Captain Lewis, a 40-year-old pilot with years of flight experience. Their eyes didn't meet, but something about his calm presence stayed in Ava's mind. Once seated, Ava looked out at the runway as the engines roared to life. Takeoff was smooth. She opened her textbook and tried to focus on reviewing anatomy notes, but her mind drifted. The sight outside her window, endless clouds, sunlight scattering across the wing, made her feel small and peaceful at the same time. Somewhere above the Atlantic Ocean, Ava pulled her hoodie a little closer and started listening to music. Around her, the cabin was quiet. Passengers settled into their own worlds. But what she didn't know was that something unexpected was about to happen. Something that would turn a simple flight into a story she would never forget. About 3 hours into the flight, the atmosphere remained calm. The crew served drinks. People watched movies or dozed off under thin blue blankets. Ava was still awake, flipping through her notes when a subtle chime echoed through the cabin. It was routine, but soon after, a flight attendant passed by in a hurry. Her expression serious, eyes slightly wide. Something was wrong. A few minutes later, the captain's voice came through the speakers. But this time, it didn't have the steady, practiced tone pilots usually use. His voice was slower, slightly strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a minor issue. Please remain seated and calm." That was all. But Ava noticed how the flight attendants exchanged glances. It wasn't minor, not for them. What no one else could see was that inside the cockpit, Captain Lewis was feeling increasingly unwell. It started as tightness in his chest and a cold sweat on his forehead. He had ignored it at first, assuming it was just fatigue. But now he struggled to focus. He turned to his co-pilot and quietly admitted he was feeling dizzy. Protocols were followed, of course, but the situation was serious. A mid-air emergency was declared, not because of the aircraft, but because the captain's health was deteriorating fast. A flight attendant whispered something near Ava's seat. She caught the words, "Medical help, anyone on board." Ava's heartbeat quickened. She stood up before she could even think. "I'm a medical student," she said. "The flight." Attendant looked surprised, then hopeful. "Come with me." Ava followed the flight attendant through the narrow aisle, heart pounding, trying to recall everything she had learned during her clinical rotations. This wasn't a classroom or a simulation. This was real minus 35,000 feet above ground, and someone needed her help. When she stepped into the cockpit, the lights were dim and the air felt heavier. Captain Lewis sat slumped slightly in his seat, his skin pale, hands trembling lightly on the controls. The co-pilot had already taken over flying, but concern was written all over his face. He glanced back as Ava entered. "Are you the medical student?" he asked quickly. Ava nodded and moved closer. She introduced herself to the captain gently, her voice calm despite her nerves. "Sir, I'm here to help. Can you tell me what you're feeling?" He responded with difficulty, his voice weak. "Tight chest. Dizzy, ... can't focus." Ava checked his pulse, fast and irregular. She asked the flight crew for the emergency kit, which thankfully included oxygen and basic medical tools. She started monitoring his vitals, gave instructions to elevate his legs slightly, and helped him breathe easier with the oxygen mask. Passengers had started whispering, some noticing the unusual activity. The announcement had been vague, but everyone could sense something serious was going on. Meanwhile, Ava remained focused. She stayed with Captain Lewis, keeping him alert, speaking in a steady tone, using everything she had learned to keep him stable. Minutes passed, long, tense, quiet minutes, and slowly, the captain's color began to return. His breathing evened out, the pain in his chest eased. Ava stayed by his side, never leaving, until a flight attendant placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He's looking better," she said softly. Ava nodded, exhaling for the first time in what felt like forever. She wasn't a doctor yet, but today, in the sky, she had become something more than just a student. As the flight continued smoothly, whispers spread quietly among the passengers about the young girl who had helped the captain. Some peeked down the aisle, trying to catch a glimpse of her. But Ava, humble and still slightly shaken, had returned to her seat and stared out the window, the clouds passing below her like soft waves. She didn't care about attention. She only hoped the captain was okay. About half an hour later, a flight attendant came to her row. "Miss Ava," she said kindly, "Captain Lewis is asking if you'd be willing to come speak with him again." Surprised, Ava nodded. When she entered the cockpit this time, the atmosphere had changed. Captain Lewis was sitting upright now, sipping water, color back in his face. He looked at her with gentle eyes and a tired smile. "You really helped." "Me back there," he said slowly. "I don't think I've ever seen someone that calm under pressure, especially not someone your age." Ava smiled, her cheeks slightly red. "I'm still learning," she said, "but I'm glad I could do something." They talked for a while, first about the episode, then slowly drifting into other things. He asked about her studies, her dreams of becoming a doctor. She learned he had flown for over 20 years, had seen almost every continent, but had never been helped mid-air by a student before. Their conversation didn't feel like one between a seasoned pilot and a young girl. It felt easy, natural. There was mutual respect, but also something unexpected, a warmth, a quiet spark. When Ava returned to her seat again, she felt different. Not just proud of what she had done, but curious. Curious about this man who seemed so strong yet vulnerable, so distant yet suddenly so real. Back in the cockpit, Captain Lewis watched her walk away, thinking the same. The hours seemed to pass faster after that strange, unexpected connection. Ava spent the rest of the flight thinking about her conversation with Captain Lewis. She wasn't sure why she kept smiling quietly to herself, or why she found herself glancing toward the front of the plane every now and then. She had helped. Saved the day, yes, but something more had been stirred in her heart, something she didn't yet understand. Finally, the captain's voice came over the speaker, calm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing shortly. Thank you for flying with us today." As the wheels touched down on the runway, the plane slowed to a gentle stop. A few moments later, the door opened and passengers began collecting their bags. Before anyone could leave, a flight attendant picked up the intercom and cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, Captain Lewis would like to say a few words." Confused and curious, everyone paused. Then the captain stepped out of the cockpit, still looking tired, but composed, confident, and holding a small note in his hand. He looked around, then fixed his eyes on Ava, who stood quietly near her seat. Today, something happened on this flight that reminded me life is always full of surprises, he began. I faced a moment of weakness, and someone I'd never met gave me strength. Passengers turned to Ava, who suddenly felt hundreds of eyes on her. Captain Lewis continued, his voice steady. I want to thank Ava, not just for her quick thinking, but for reminding me of kindness, intelligence, and courage. A gentle wave of applause began to fill the cabin, spreading like ripples in water. Some passengers stood and clapped. Ava lowered her eyes, overwhelmed but smiling. Then, as the applause died down, the captain said something no one expected, and, if she allows me, I'd like to see her again. Outside this plane, for coffee, a conversation, or maybe more. The cabin went completely silent for a moment. Ava looked up, stunned. But the look in his eyes wasn't a joke, it was genuine. Soft clapping began again, even louder this time. Some passengers whistled, others smiled knowingly. Ava blushed deeply, caught between surprise and something that almost felt like excitement. Ava stepped off the plane, still in a daze. The cool airport air hit her face, but her thoughts were warm and tangled. She had never imagined anything like this would happen on a simple flight. Just hours ago, she was a tired student flying back from a seminar, and now she had the entire cabin clapping for her, and a pilot asking to see her again. As she walked through the terminal, she heard quick footsteps behind her. Turning around, she saw Captain Lewis, now in his uniform jacket, a travel bag in hand, his face calm but hopeful. Ava, he said gently, slowing down as he reached her. I wasn't trying to make a scene back there. I just didn't want to miss the chance to say something real. Ava smiled, still surprised by his honesty. You definitely didn't miss it, she replied, her voice soft but steady. He walked beside her as they reached the luggage area. They talked, not like strangers, but like two people who were already on the second page of something unplanned but meaningful. He told her he had flown for most of his life, but lately it had all begun to feel routine. Today changed that, he said. Meeting you reminded me what it's like to feel something unexpected. Ava, still unsure where this was going, felt strangely calm. She had always been focused on school, on her future, on becoming someone strong and independent. Romance was never part of her plan. But here was a man, older, wiser, different from anyone she knew, and yet there was no pressure in his words, just honesty. Before leaving the airport, they sat at a small cafe by the exit gate. No headlines, no crowd, just quiet conversation. They spoke about life, values, books, dreams. Time passed quickly. As she stood to leave, he looked at her with a quiet smile. I don't know where this is going, he said, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to find out. Ava nodded. Me too, she whispered. They exchanged numbers, and with that, they walked out into the city, not as pilot and passenger, not as young girl and older man, but as two people who had accidentally crossed paths, and maybe, just maybe, started something real. Weeks passed. What started as a strange and unexpected encounter in the sky slowly began to grow into something deeper. Ava returned to her busy schedule as a medical student, but her evenings were often filled with long conversations with Captain Lewis. They didn't meet every day, but when they did, their time felt real. Sometimes it was coffee at a quiet cafe, sometimes a walk through the park, and sometimes just sitting in silence, comfortable and effortless. Their 21-year age gap didn't seem to matter anymore. What mattered was how they listened to each other, supported each other, and how they both found peace in a world that often felt noisy and rushed. For Ava, he wasn't just a pilot, he was calm, grounded, and kind. For Lewis, she wasn't just a bright young student, she was light, fresh air, and a reminder that life still had surprises. The world around them might have questioned it, but inside their small, private world, things felt right. Then, one late afternoon, exactly a month after their flight, Lewis invited Ava to a small rooftop dinner. Nothing fancy, just quiet lights, fresh air, and a view of the city. As the sun dipped low behind the buildings, Lewis looked at her and said, "I never believed life gave second chances, but now I do." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver ring. Simple, elegant, meaningful. "I'm not asking for forever today," he said softly. "I'm asking for the chance to build something honest with you, at your pace, in your way." Ava, surprised and emotional, looked into his eyes. She didn't feel rushed. She didn't feel pressured. She just felt seen. After a long pause, she took his hand and smiled. "Let's take that chance," she whispered. From that day on, their story became more than just a memory from a flight. It became a quiet kind of love, built on trust, kindness, and respect. Not everyone understood it, but they didn't need everyone to. It was their story, and for them, that was enough. Thank you for listening to this story on Arise Avenue. If you enjoyed this heartfelt journey and want more beautifully written English stories that help you grow your vocabulary and your emotions, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. A new powerful story awaits you tomorrow. See you again soon.